Hello everybody, it's good to be back on the channel. So, in this warm weather, you're kind of like thinking, oh, I hope it's nice and cool, so I won't have to put the fan on, and you'd hear the fan in the background, and I mean, that wouldn't help. Thankfully it's nice and cool, and I don't have to put the fan on, and we can get on with this video. So I've got some books here that I'd like to share. This is a kind of, I'd sort of say a sort of a mixed bag. There are new books that I've never shown on the channel before, and there are other books that I've got from out in the wild. So I didn't buy them online. So here we go. Let's see. One of the great things about going out into the wild is you never know what you might find, and I was able to find some of these books related to Berlin that I was surprised to see, because I never thought I would actually see some of these books. So it's always a surprise when you do go and find them. Here's one. It says Raid Over Berlin. It says #1 bestseller. It's a relatively short book. It's got a picture of the, I think, the author sort of sitting on the forlorn, sitting on the sofa, and it's interesting because if he didn't tell his story, we wouldn't get to hear about it. And he's probably at that age where at some point he will pass on, so he wants to actually record the memories that he has while he's still able to put them in a book. And it's a kind of like his legacy. It actually shows anybody who, like myself, who will read his book, and it will tell me something about his life, something about his experience, and something about World War II. So A Raid Over Berlin, charity shop find. I think it cost £1. Here's another charity shop find. The Shortest History of Germany. Now I've seen this. I mean, this is a book that I suspect somebody bought only for them to read it, and then they take it down the charity shop, and you think, well, I don't know what the price was, maybe £10, £12, whatever. And I think I got it for £2. Now when I looked at the back of this book, there is no endnotes and there's no index. So I'm sort of thinking, well, why is that? Unless the publisher couldn't be bothered to put in an index, and the author not bothering to have any endnotes. And then it has the postscript, and I read the post. I was reading the postscript. Postscript September 2022. In February 2022, it became clear that Tsar Vladimir really had been just waiting for his great game to line up as he set out to enforce regime change on Ukraine by Route 1. But the Ukrainians had long prepared for this assault and had received, in the nick of time, small but vital shipments of anti-tank rockets from the US, the UK and the Baltic states. Putin's calculation that Germany's shocking dependence on Russian gas, which many people had pointed out beforehand would shackle it, very nearly proved true. Even the Ukrainians themselves rose mightily to the challenge. Germany's new SDP leadership seemed to be the laggards of Europe, and many prominent liberal intellectuals Vermentally opposed arming Ukraine. I was thinking, why am I reading that in this book? It kind of reminds me of when I was in the Berlin bunker, naturally in Berlin, and I saw like a display for the Ukrainian war, and a lot of it was propaganda. And when I read that, because I know a lot more from keeping up with the news in about the war in Ukraine from other sources, not just from the mainstream media, but from independent reporters and independent podcasters and people that have, like, you know, retired military officers, or, you know, journalists from one kind or another, and they get the truth as opposed to a narrative. Now, when I read this, I thought, oh, here we go. This is something that I remember seeing when I went in the Berlin bunker in Berlin, and I saw the display about, you know, what they were doing for Ukraine, and I realised Germany is in a really bind. They were really in a big bind because, one, they're supporting Israel when Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, and two, they are supporting Ukraine when a lot of Ukrainians are neo-Nazis, or they're in the Azov battalion. There are other battalions other than Azov, but they are neo-Nazis. So I had a really good understanding of, as far as determined, as to what the truth is as regards to Ukraine. But anyway, this channel's principally about Berlin and Germany, so I will end it there. So anyway, The Shortest History of Germany by James Howes, Hawes. Another charity shop find. Berlin blockade breakers, the Berlin airlift. Now this, I remember when this actually came out, but I never bought it at the time. So to have it now, it sort of makes up for when I didn't have it, and I just, you know, was distracted, or I was into other things, or other parts of Berlin history. Why I mention this is, one, this is a charity shop find, and two, for the fact that a lot of those that partook in the Berlin airlift are still alive. And if you go to the back of the book, you will see interviews with various people, where he'll have interviews over the phone, interviews where he meets them one-to-one, or he'll have interviews via email and things like that. And that is so helpful, because you're getting an oral history from people that actually experience the experience of the Berlin airlift as it was at that time. And this makes for interesting reading, because you're not always accessing, or you might not always be able to access all the documents to be able to write your book. The other thing is, he might be under pressure to be able to deliver a book for a deadline. So he's under the cosh trying to have to finish a book in a certain amount of time, in order for the publishers to then go and publish and put it in the shops. So the author did, I think he's done a fantastic job with this. This book was quite thick, actually, and it's one of those Waterstones, Barnes and Noble type books. It's a sort of a book that you're sure to find in a bookstore, and in a charity shop, as I did. So, The Blockade Breakers, the Berlin Airlift, by Helena P. Schaffer, I think it is. Gosh, I'm sorry about this. Schrader. Helena P. Schrader. Another charity shop find. Okay. Let's see. Now this one is called Checkmate in Berlin. I think I've showed this one before, but the point is that what I'm trying to make with this book is the level of research that this author went through in order for him to write his book. Now you can see that this is a book pushed by the publisher. Why? Because it says the million copy best-selling author. So again, it's one of these bookshop, Barnes and Noble, Waterstones type books that you're bound to see. And again, it's a kind of a book that you'll find in a charity shop. However, this is a book that I bought online, and I must admit I was a little bit put off by it, because I judged it by its cover and what it was saying, because I knew this is a book that it's a market, it's a publisher's marketing strategies to try and get as many people to recognise this book as I possibly can in order to make the sales. But the author's done a fantastic job, and you can tell by the end notes, by the interviews that he conducted with people that actually were in Berlin at the time, and not only that he was able to get documents or manuscripts that were unpublished. Now, one of my favourite book on Berlin is called The Last Battle by Cornelius Ryan, as some of my viewers who watch this channel will recognise. I've since heard that there is a lot of research that Cornelius Ryan did that never ended up in the book, and it's kind of like what this author has done, Giles Milton, where he's had access to manuscripts but they've never been published, and you can only go into an archive or you go into a library where if they'll give access to you in order for you to examine these papers, these old documents, these manuscripts, either written by an author or by a person that was actually there at the time, that was part of the occupation of Berlin as it was happening. So I judged the book by this cover, but I did end up buying this book, and I realised the effort and the extent of research that this author has gone into in order for him to write this book. So I know this book will be a really good read, and not just to be read once, but perhaps read several times and annotated as well. So Checkmate in Berlin by Giles Milton. Okay, let's see. Yeah. Hellstorm. This is by Thomas Goodridge. Now, I was a bit disappointed with this book. Not with the book itself, but with the, how can I put it? Not with the contents of the book or what the author wrote. Nothing like that. But with the condition of the book. Now, I paid £15 for this. I bought this online. And tragically, it's water damage, and and it really left a sour taste in my mouth, because I thought, well, if I'm paying 15 quid, surely I should be getting a book that is of better quality in terms of condition than a water damaged book. But at least the pages haven't stuck together, and at least the book hasn't been annotated in any way, shape or form. The only doubts that I have is that the author references Guy Sager, I think his name is Guy Sager, who had written a book called Forgotten Soldier. I think it's called Forgotten Soldier. And he actually quotes from that particular book. Now, I've heard stories that book was a work of fiction, or it'd been exaggerated. It wasn't to the extent, it wasn't historically accurate. But there's no way of knowing. I mean, it's not like I'm going to talk to the author to find out how true that is. But that did put doubts in my mind as I was flicking through this book, and I thought, oh no, because I'm a truth seeker. I want to get as close to the truth as I possibly can. And when you're studying history and reading history books, you want to know that the author was doing his research in good faith in order for him to write the best book he could possibly write, and that the history is as accurate as he could ever make it. So when I saw that reference to Guy Sager, I think his name is, I was disappointed. I thought, oh no, it sort of does put a doubt in your mind. But having said that, I've listened to interviews of this particular author. He does sound genuine. He does sound like a person who would not pull the wool over anybody else's eyes, and also for his own reputation, because you want to have other historians read his book and think, he's done a good job. But having said all that, this is post-war, and it talks about what the occupiers did to Germany after the war. Tragically, as we now know, or actually it's been quite clear since the end of the war, women that were violated, and but what we don't know is how many German prisoners of war died as a result of the treatment in the POW camps. Also, there's talk of the mass ethnic cleansing. So a lot of ethnic Germans were forced out of East Prussia, and they had to make their way to Germany, and a lot of them settled in Eastern Germany as opposed to Western Germany. But a lot of those that were on the march, so to speak, because there wasn't like, you could just go to the station and get on a train. They had to walk, and a lot didn't make it. So this is a side of German history that fascinates me, because we have so many books and so many documentaries on World War II, but we don't really have many on the aftermath of the war, hence why I bought this book. So this is called Hellstorm by Thomas Goodrich. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Berlin, Portrait of a City Through the Centuries by Roy McLean. The reason why I chose this book is because this goes before the bounds of where I like to focus on, the history between 1914 and 1994, and this goes before 1914. Now, when I bought it, I didn't realise that it did until I actually got the book and flipped through it, and I thought, right, okay. And it wasn't something that necessarily bothered me. In fact, it's a kind of like a backstory. It's useful to know things that happened before 1914 in German history. But what I picked this book out is really the bibliography, the references that the author has towards Berlin as and the angle that he's taken in order for him to write this particular book. What I will say is that I wanted to know, like, for example, David Bowie in Berlin. Now, I've got a documentary on Bowie in Berlin. It's called Bowie in Berlin. It was really disappointing, I have to say. I was really, how can I put this? I mean, not so much with buying the DVD, but with what the DVD or the documentary was actually saying about David Bowie, because it wasn't really saying much about him personally and what he was doing in Berlin when he was there, but about the music, about the trilogy. Now, the Berlin trilogy, you've got Low, Heroes and Lodger, and like in one of my other videos I explained that Low and Lodger weren't recorded in Berlin, only Heroes was, and even Heroes was mixed in Switzerland. But it's famous as a result of him always making reference to the Berlin trilogy, which in effect it wasn't really. It was, but that's not so much my point. My point is that at the back of the book it references books written about Bowie while he was in Berlin, and I could never find them, but looking in the back of this book, I was able to find books about David Bowie in Berlin that I couldn't get from any other source. The other thing I'd like to mention about this book is the fact that the author said there were certain parts of the history, Berlin history, that there's no record of it. Now, when I was reading A Woman in Berlin, which is written by a Berliner who kept a diary on the last days of the war and after, and when the war actually ended, her experiences when the Russians got into Berlin. I was thinking at the time, how many other stories are just like that one? And, you know, I'd love to be able to find books that will tell their story in book form. Now, I have to say this: I haven't got the greatest collection of diaries. I have some diaries on Berlin, but I haven't got as many as I would like. But it was through reading that book that was the thought I had in the back of my mind. I was thinking, how many other books? And in relation to this particular book, when he was talking about certain historical figures where there is no record of their life, there was no author that had written a book on them, who had studied them, and then the book actually got published, because it could be a manuscript somewhere lying in a library in Berlin somewhere, or maybe in Hamburg, who knows. But so what happens is a lot of these stories get lost, so because we have no reference to these stories, and then myth becomes created, because we don't have any evidence of who these people were when they were alive and what they did. So anyway, that's just an insight that I have, and why I like to show this book. So this one's called Berlin, A Portrait of a City Through the Centuries by Roy McLean. Okay. In some of my other videos, I mentioned about documents. You know, I have this fascination for documents, because that is where the truth is. And if you've got these documents, it's like evidence of a particular event that actually occurred. Now, here's another charity shop, or Goodwill in the United States, or Liberty Thrift and Home Furnishing, or Salvation Army. It's a thrift store find, and it's the SAS Alibi of a Nation from 1922 to 1945 by Gerard Reitlinger. And what did I find? So it says here, based almost entirely on original German documents, including the captured files of the SS leadership, the SS Alibi of a Nation gives a final account of the Nazi Praetorian Guard. With steadily mounting tension, the story moves from the origins of the SS before 1923 to its supremacy, 20 years later, as the most appalling instrument of the political military terror known to history. Of course, I picked it up straight away, didn't I? You know, I didn't even flick. Well, I did flick through it, but as soon as I saw that, I said, "Yeah, that's." I mean, it's amazing sometimes how you can find things in places where you never thought you would. So that was a really good find for me. This book cost me like £4. It is bone dry. I've got to admit, when I sort of flicked through it and I was reading passages from it, it is bone dry. But like I said, you know, if you're getting the documents, you're getting the evidence of events that actually occurred, and as opposed to this book where it's kind of like, you know, you don't find anything, and you have to sort of take things from stories and hearsay and try and put try to create a story that would be good enough for somebody to read, but historically wouldn't be accurate. Whereas this is based on files, and a lot of these files were used in the Nuremberg trials. So this is a valuable book for me personally, as a result of the research and the documents that this author was able to read, study, and use for his book. So, the SS Alibi of a Nation, 1922 to 1945. Now, this is going. Actually, no. This is actually still reference to Berlin and German history, and this one is by Ian Cobain, and it's called Cruel Britannia, A Secret History of Torture. Now, Britain, or you know, the United Kingdom likes to give the impression that it's, you know, it believes in human rights, democracy, freedom, and it likes to give the impression that the government and all those in Whitehall are clean, in the sense of that they wouldn't do anything untoward any persons of any kind, you know, anywhere around the world, harm. Now, this is not true. This is and this book proves it, and I know from other sources, you know, the British, you know, they use torture in Malaya. They did it in Kenya against the Mau Mau. We know that they did it to the Indians in India, and I'm sure there are lots of other places in their former colonies where they abused the natives of that particular country. And not only that, they did it during World War II and just after World War II, where they were torturing German soldiers and officers. And there is a place, if you know where the Russian embassy is in London, it's just behind Kensington Gardens or Kensington Palace. And Kensington Palace is where Princess Diana once lived. Well, just along those outside, on the side of Kensington Palace, and where the Russian embassy is where these tortures were carried out. And there was a guy named Scotland who would use these torture methods, and the idea is to be able to turn these captured German soldiers and officers into double agents, so that they would work for the for the British government and the military, you know, for the intelligence, for MI5 and MI6. But what they did to these men was just, I mean, it was just beyond compare. And this chap named Scotland wrote a book. He wrote a book about what he did, and the powers that be were so enraged. You know, they wanted to see the book, and they came up to a compromise that he would effectively rewrite his book in order for him to publish that book. You cannot make it up. This is how secretive the puppet masters, those who are in power, you know, the ruling class, behave. And I'll read a passage from this book. It says, 2 years after Scotland submitted his manuscript to be vetted, the War Office decided to strike a deal with him. The old man had been threatening to publish his book in the United States, and the War Office knew that a prosecution under the Official Secrets Act would not be sustained. Despite the threat, that had been issued, Scotland was told that he would be allowed to publish in the UK, but only after a rewritten manuscript had been vetted and every line of incriminating material expunged. He was also told that he would never be allowed to recover his original manuscript. Do you see how history gets rewritten? And the impression and the image that Britain likes to portray around the world, that they don't do this kind of stuff. They were, you know, after, you know, when they went into Iraq and Afghanistan, they were still torturing people. Northern Ireland was the same. It wasn't like they weren't doing it; they were. And this book proves it. Now, I don't know to the extent that it was done. It's like you hear about it, but then it's only after you read a book like this do you see how deep it goes, the rabbit hole goes. So, very powerful stuff and disturbing at the same time. So this is called Cruel Britannia, A Secret History of Torture by Ian Cobain. Alright. Now, here's another book I got here. It's called The War on Paper, 20 Documents That Defined the Second World War by Anthony Richards. Now this is published, I think, by the Imperial War Museum. This is an astonishing book. I got this very, very cheap actually. I bought it online, but I got it very cheap. And what's so extraordinary is the fact that you see the documents. They actually print them in their original form in the book. Like, and here's another one. Victory in Europe. So you see the actual document. You know, they make a copy of it. And this is one. This is Hitler's final political testament. And it's where Treudel Junge, she was told to type it. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And not only that, at the end of the book you get these documents, like, or handwritten notes. This is amazing stuff. This is, I mean, I didn't expect to see all this. And in fact, this is the first time that I actually looked at these things properly. So, as you're seeing this for the first time, I'm seeing these for the first time. I knew it was in the book, but I never got them out. I never looked at them. This is amazing. Let's see what this one. Instrument of surrender of all German armed forces in Holland, in North West Germany, including all islands, and in Denmark. And you've got all the signatures of all the officers, of the German officers on the right hand side, and then you've got Field Marshal Montgomery on the. Ah, this is fantastic. I mean, you can pause this and read it yourself. And I've only looked at this now. This is so when you're looking at this, it's when I've looked at it. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, I got this really cheap. This was, knew this was 25 quid, and I don't know, I must have paid 250 for something like this. So yeah, The War on Paper, 20 Documents That Defined the Second World War by Anthony Richards. And there's just one more thing I'd like to show. There, look at that. It's the archive. It's fantastic. Okay. Now, what I tend to do is some of you might be aware, I'm sure Stick is aware, that I like to look for documents in book form, diaries, and then scholarly books. That is to say that those that work in a university, or professors and people like that, because they get the time and they get the funding and they get the support from the university that they work in or study in to do research on a particular subject, and in this case Berlin. But here's one I've got. So Berlin Wall, 1961-1989. Photographs from the stock of the archives of the land of Berlin, selected and commented by Volker Viergutz. And this is a kind of like a book that you would buy if you were a tourist going to Berlin. And I could sometimes poo-poo this kind of thing, these kind of publications, because it's for the tourists, you know what I mean? It's kind of like a little souvenir. They might just flick through it a couple of times and then it gets put on a shelf, or it gets taken down a charity shop. But when I look at these photographs, I think, wow, they're astounding photographs. Absolutely amazing. And there's so many of these photographs I've never seen before. So there's because each decade it was slightly different. So say that's clearly an 80s photos that were taken there. And you get different photos. Like say here, this is a great photo. It's where you see no man's land. It looks like a racehorse track. That was no man's land. And I always wondered who got that land after the fall of the Berlin Wall, because it was plumb real estate to have access to where the border used to be. It's fabulous. Let's see. That's Checkpoint Charlie. There was one photo that I really want to show you that it just reminds me of so much of Berlin, or my Berlin is, the Berlin that I like to see. There we go. See this photograph? And I always said that there was these buildings that that was still in perfect, condition so that you can live in it. And then you get this bare wall. And it's almost like where there were buildings attached to it that were bombed during the war, so they tore that down, but part of the building that is still standing they keep, because having a home in Berlin after the war was pretty hard, because there was so much destruction, and consequently they wanted to keep as many buildings as they possibly can that was habitable. So, but this is a, when I look at this photo, I think, yeah, this is Berlin for me. This is the Berlin that I recognise. Okay, it's my last book. This is by Sarah Colvin, Ulrike Meinhof and West German Terrorism. This is written by a scholar, somebody that works in a university, and I assume studies, because if somebody is a scholar, if somebody is a professor, they never stop learning themselves. They do their research, and I'm sure they go to other lectures, and they go into the archive, and Sarah Kovlin, who I've mentioned before, because I heard her on giving an interview when she was talking about this book, and she was talking to Richard Huffman, and Richard Huffman is somebody who's recognised and respected as far as the Baader-Meinhof gang or the Red Army faction's concerned. There isn't anything that he doesn't know about the Baader-Meinhof gang. And but when after the interview with Sarah Colvin, he said, "I think she knows more about the Baader-Meinhof gang than I do," and hence why I bought this book. Now, this book cost a breathtaking £72 for me to buy, and I have to admit I was disappointed. Not with Sarah Kovlin, not with her writing, but the book itself. You could say is an artifact, because I spent so much money on the book. I was disappointed with the quality, the condition of the book, because there was a lot of highlighting in it. There was a lot of underlining in it. It's like 80 pages, or 80, 81, 82 pages where it's been underlined, and that did piss me off. But at the end of the day, it's the content, it's what was written, and because of that interview with Richard Huffman, that I was so impressed by, because there isn't that many books written in English, or that were perhaps written in German and then translated. So you want to get somebody who's taken the time to actually do their research and to get to the crux of who Ulrike Meinhof was. Now, to me, she was like a Janet Street Porter. And for those in the United States, you won't know who she was, but in the UK, you might know who Janet Street Porter was. And she was this kind of intellectual, journalist that would appear on television, and she would take part in debates and in these talk shows and things like that. And I have to be honest, I haven't seen Janet Street Porter on television for a long time, but she reminds when I think of Ulrike Meinhof, I think of Janet Street Porter. She came across as that person, and Ulrike Meinhof made a determined effort to be part of the Red Army faction. It wasn't like she was in two minds to do it, and and what about her reputation, and what about her income? She decided that she wanted to be part of this terrorist group, going around robbing banks and planting bombs in army camps, army bases around Germany, and I believe, until I'm proved wrong, but I sincerely believe this. If the Stasi wasn't around at the time, if the Berlin Wall wasn't around at the time, I don't think you would have had the Red Army faction. They're very much a part of the time that they were in operation. So from 1970 to 1972, until they were caught. But in order to understand the Baader-Meinhof gang, you must understand Ulrike Meinhof, because she was the intellectual side of the Baader-Meinhof gang. She could debate, she knew her arguments, she was well educated, she was a journalist, so she knew what she was talking about when she spoke. And to understand the Red Army faction, you have to understand Ulrike Meinhof. But as again, this is sweet and sour. On the one hand, it's sweet because I know I've got this book, and on the other hand, it's a bit sour because of the amount of money I spent on this book. Anyway, that concludes my presentation to this channel. Stick, I hope you're well. Do leave a comment if you can, or not just to Stick, but to anybody else watching this. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and if you have any ideas for this channel, let us know what they are, and leave a comment to let me know, and I could mention you for the next presentation, that you gave me this idea to do another presentation. So, auf Wiedersehen, grüß dich und Baba und fall nicht nieder.